I am Angelo Sada, and we are belong with the Group 1. I'll be presenting the taxation in the Philippines, its historical development. This is the topic includes: first, definition of tax; second, the importance of characteristic of taxes; third, the theory of taxation; fourth, the power of taxation; fifth, the purpose of taxation; sixth, the importance of taxation; seventh is the nature of taxation; and lastly, the constitutional limitation of tax. But before we're going to proceed our topic, let's think about it. What are taxes? Yes, taxes. I know there's a lot of us know what is taxes or what taxes purpose are. So, let's proceed our topic. What are tax or taxes? Taxes are the enforced proportional contribution from the person and the property lived by the state and brought to by the sovereignty for the support of the government and for all the public needs and purposes. A tax is a charge by the government on the income of an individual, corporations, or trust, as well as the value of the estates or a gift. The objective in assessing the tax is to generate revenue to use for the needs of the public. The essential characteristic of a tax are that it is not a voluntary payment or a donation, but an enforced contribution exacted pursuant to the legislative authority. So now we know what is the meaning of the tax, or what is the purpose of the tax. So the tax is not a voluntary payment or a donation payment, because the donation payment is from your heart, and it's okay if you will not to give, and it's okay if how much you pay. And the voluntary payment is also you volunteer yourself to pay this one. That is the meaning of not tax, because if you have voluntary payment, that is not a tax, because a tax is you have an obligation to pay the contributions and exact, because this is the demand for all of us. Even though you are students, even though you're older teachers, because we have an obligation to pay the tax for the things that we need. That's all for my introductions, and let's proceed to the next reporter, Monica Shane. Thank you.
Good day everyone, I'm Monica Shane Gallo from BS Ed Philippine 1B. Now, I will discuss the important characteristic of taxes. Taxation should follow the four principles: fairness, certainty, convenience, and efficiency. Fairness in that taxation should be compatible with taxpayer conditions, including their ability to pay in line with personal and family needs. Certainly should mean that taxpayers are clearly informed about why and how taxes are levied. Convenience relates to the ease of compliance of the taxpayer, how simple is process of collecting or paying taxes. Finally, efficiency touches on how collection of taxes. Basically put, the administration of tax collection should not negatively affect the allocation and use of resources in the economy, and certainly shouldn't cost more than taxes themselves.
The theory of the taxation. Several theories of taxation exist in public economics. Governments at all levels, national, regional, and local, need to raise revenue from a variety of sources to finance public sector expenditures. Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations, 1776 wrote, Such things as defending the country and maintaining the institution of good government are of general benefit to the public. Thus, it is reasonable that the population as a whole should contribute to the tax cost. It is also reasonable to demand certain other things of a tax system, for example, that the amounts of tax individuals pay should bear some relationship to their abilities to pay. Good taxes meet four major criteria. They are, first, proportionate to incomes or abilities to pay. Second, certain rather than arbitrary. Third, payable at times and in ways convenient to the taxpayers. And fourth, cheap to administer and collect. In modern public finance literature, there have been two main issues: who can pay and who can benefit. Benefit principle. Influential theories have been the ability theory presented by Arthur Cecil Figo and the benefit theory developed by Eric Lida. There is a later version of the benefit theory known as the voluntary exchange theory. Under the benefit theory, tax level are automatically determined because taxpayers pay proportionately for the government benefits they receive. In other words, the individuals who benefit the most from public service pay the most taxes.
The purposes and importance of taxation. The purpose of taxation is undoubtedly to raise revenues of funds to support the government in its services. Taxation is also utilized as a tool to carry out the national objective of social and economic development. There has two purposes of taxation. The first one is the primary purpose. It is to provide funds or property with which to promote the general welfare of its citizens and to enable it to finance its multifarious activities. And the second one is the secondary purposes. The secondary purposes is to strengthen anemic enterprises by giving tax exemption and to protect local industries against foreign competition through imposition of high customs duties on imported goods, and to reduce inequalities in wealth and income by imposing progressively higher taxes, and to prevent inflation by increasing taxes or ward off depression by decreasing taxes. The importance of taxation derives from the unavoidable and inevitable obligation of the government to protect the people and extend them benefits in the form of public projects and services. In return, the people are subjected to the reciprocal duty of sharing the expenses in the form of taxes. The most important purpose of taxation is to raise resources for government to deliver essential public services. Taxes pay for many of the things that are fundamental to functioning societies around the world, such as healthcare, schools, and social services.
The nature of the power of taxation. Taxation partakes of the following nature, namely, first, the power of taxation is an inherent power. Being indispensable in the existence and function of the government, it is inherent because it exists without the necessity of any specific grant of the power by the Constitution. Just like the police power and the power of eminent domain, the power of taxation exists independently of the Constitution. Second, is the taxing power is essentially a legislative function even in the absence of an express constitutional grant. The power of taxation falls on the legislative branch of government as part of the more general power of lawmaking. It is inherent in sovereignty. The power of taxation exists independent of any legislation. There is no need to enact a law to exercise that power because that power springs at the moment you have the
existence of the state. This is inherent because this is based on necessity.
The constitutional limitation of taxation. The power of taxation is subject to constitutional and inherent limitations. The limitations to the power of taxations that are embodied and categorically stated in the Constitution itself are the following. Observance of due process of law. Section 1, Article 3, Bill of Rights. No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall any person be denied the equal protection of the laws. Due process requires that the procedures by which laws are applied must be even-handed, so that individuals are not subjected to the arbitrary exercise of government power. Exactly what procedures are needed to satisfy due process, however, will vary depending on the circumstances and subject matter involved. Due process, a course of legal proceedings according to rules and principles that have been established in a system of jurisprudence for the enforcement and protection of private rights. In each case, due process contemplates an exercise of the power of government as the law permits and sanctions, under recognized safeguards for the protection of individual rights. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution, known as the Bill of Rights, guarantee essential rights and civil liberties, such as the right to free speech, the right to bear arms, and the right to a fair trial, as well as protecting the role of the states in American government. Observance of equal protection of the laws. Section 1, Article 3, Bill of Rights. No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall any person be denied the equal protection of the laws. All are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. All are entitled to equal protection against any discrimination in violation of this declaration and against any incitement to such discrimination. The principle of equality and non-discrimination guarantees that those in equal circumstances are dealt with equally in law and practice. However, it is important to stress that not every distinction or difference in treatment will amount to discrimination. Prohibition against imprisonment for non-payment of full tax. Section 20, Article 3, Bill of Rights. No person shall be imprisoned for debt or non-payment of a full tax. The prime duty of the government is to serve and protect the people. The government may call upon the people to defend the state, and in the fulfillment thereof, all citizens may be required, under conditions provided by law, to render personal, military, or civil services. Prohibition against impairment of obligation of contracts. Section 10, Article 3, Bill of Rights. No law impairing the obligation of contracts shall be passed. The power of taxation cannot be exercised in a manner that would impair the obligation of contracts. What is prohibited is that a taxing statute be passed that would alter the relative rights of the parties with each other. The mere fact that a tax makes the conduct of a business more expensive or makes an activity more difficult does not result in the impairment of the obligation of contracts. Contract is impaired only if the relative position of the parties to a contract, equality that is assumed when the contract was entered into, is disturbed by the operation of a taxing statute. Application. An example of impairment by law is when a tax exemption based on a contract is revoked by a later taxing statute, but exemption from taxation provided for in a franchise, although in a sense is an exemption based on a contract, may be revoked because under the Constitution, a franchise is subject to immediate alteration or repeal by the Congress. Section 11, Article 7. The obligation of a contract is impaired when its term or condition are changed by law or by a party without the consent of the other, thereby weakening the position or rights of the latter. An example of impairment by law is when a later taxing statute revokes a tax exemption based on a contract, but this only applies when the tax exemption has been granted for a valid consideration. A latter statute may revoke exemption from taxation provided for in a franchise because the Constitution provides that a franchise is subject to amendment, alteration, or repeal. The parties to the contract cannot exercise the power of taxation.
Requirement of uniformity and equity in taxation. Section 28, Article 6, Legislative Department. The rule of taxation shall be uniform and equitable. The Congress shall evolve a progressive system of taxation. The Congress may by law authorize the President to fix within specified limits and subject to such limitations and restrictions as it may impose tariff rates, import and export routes, tonnage and whartage dues, other duties are imposed with the framework of the National Development Program of Government. Charitable institutions, churches, and personage or convents appertinent thereto, mosques, non-profit cemeteries, and all lands, buildings, and all improvements actually directly and exclusively used for religious, charitable, or educational purposes shall be exempt from taxation. Prohibitions against taxations appropriations for religious purposes. Section 29, Paragraph 2, Article 5, Legislative Department. Number public money or property shall be appropriated, applied, paid, or employed directly or indirectly for the use, benefit, or support of any seats, church, denominations, sectarians, institution or system or religions, or any priest, preachers, minister, or dignitary is assigned to the armed forces, or to any penal institutions, or government orphanage or leprosarium. Prohibitions against taxations of religious, charitable, and educational entities. Religious and charitable institutions are exempt from property taxes. Section 28, Article 6, Legislative Department. Charitable institutions, churches, and personages or convents appertinent thereto, mosques, non-profit, cemeteries, and all lands, buildings, and improvements actually directly and exclusively used for religious, charitable, or educational purposes shall be exempt from taxation. Prohibitions against taxations of non-stock or non-profit educational institutions and proprietary educational institutions, non-stock and non-profit educational institutions. Proprietary educational institutions are exempt from property and income taxes as well as customs duties exempt income derived from business activity not related to its educational purposes. Section 28, Article 6, Legislative Department. Charitable institutions, churches, and personage or convents appertinent thereto, mosques, non-profit, cemeteries, and all lands, buildings, and improvements actually directly and exclusively used for religious, charitable, or educational purposes shall be exempted from taxations.
History of taxation in the Philippines in pre-Spanish era. All habit records had been lost in antiquity. There is a long-distant belief that ancient Philippine in the barangay started in practice of paying taxes. Of the purpose of paying taxes was simple. It is for the protections of they received from the local chieftain. The collected tax was called the buwis. The local chieftain's family members naturally were enjoying exemptions for paying taxes. Non-payment of the buwis was already punishable during this period. Taxation. Taxes are a revenue system of the Philippines during the Spanish era. Prior and the advent of the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors, we Spanish Filipino thrived on a system of a mere subsistence. That fact could have been made the colonized and the governing of the natives, the Indians of the Indus, an almost impossible task. The Spaniards realized that in order to them to effectively maintain control of the colony, then they must take measures in order to improve the productions of food and the gathering and storing of resources in the islands. To do this, the Spaniards instituted the revenue-generating measures such as systematic taxations of the compulsory sales of the agricultural products and the colonial government. Later, having been introduced to better farming equipment, the natives were able to practice a more intensive from the agriculture that enabled them to sell that some realists or Chinese traders and a higher market price on the fulfill their tax requirements. The original basis of the revenue system is the responsibility of the native chieftains, the cabezas de barangay, for the taxes leveled against the people of their districts. Although Spain provided the most elaborate means for determining how much could a cabeza be complete with the requirements to pay into the treasury. Yet, as a sort of thesis of recognitions of the cabeza's original rights of the natural authority in his barangay, there was hardly a close inquiry for the scrutiny as how much could any cabeza might be collecting and taking himself. The earlier Spanish laws distinctly recognized certain revenues of belongs as the cabeca del barangay by virtue of his position and authority of acquaintance, which is received from his barangay. Once the law simply requires that the cabeza persuade his people to render additional tributes to the crown of Spain. Those vassal votes he made they had been become even in the more recent laws, and the great roster is made from remunerations of MS services. The courses which can be justified only the suppositions that he could be self early revenues from the people by the virtue and the positions unnatural as the cabeca de barangay.
The bywords and the ultimate ends were revenue and revenue generation. Many important sources of revenue were assigned or concentrated, and the profits of conducting these farms were also levied upon without scruple by those high. Government officials were usually appointed by favor. Their nominal salaries were often meager or small, especially in the case of those converted with the revenue system. Numerous fees and percentage were allowed, and as the people were always ignorant of the law, the amounts which the public officials had for external and profiteer MG were almost unlimited. The people, the native taxpayers, could for the most part know of their rights under the law. There was compliance of the Christ royal and royal edicts pertaining to taxation until first 7th of Governor Jose de la Gandara. And fewer such law existed or were published at all, usually in buildings. These laws were in Spanish, a tongue but little understood among the people. The laws and regulation related generation and taxation were scattered throughout other taxes. Therefore, of ascertaining and determination on verifying the pertinent statutory provision and the application of this revenue or tax law on the Philippines island was a most daunting and difficult task. Whatever may have been the origin of the abuses and malfeasance in the administration of the tax law of the Philippines, and however these abuses undoubtedly were, they cannot obscure the fact that their statutes provided a certain logical and equitable system of taxes, which might perhaps be improved in some minor particulars, but which, as a whole, if honestly administered, would have met all the requirements of the Spanish colony and government in the Philippine island. The various taxes raised and collected. During the Spanish period, the taxes of revenues raised and collected were usually entered under 6 general headings. First, the direct taxes, including the personal taxes and the income taxes. Second, the indirect taxes or the customs duties. Third, the monopolies, including various times and stamp taxes and the sale of quicksilver, salt, playing cards, corrosive sublimate, gunpowder, spirituous liquors, tobacco, and opium. Fourth, lotteries. Fifth, public domain. Sixth, miscellaneous and indeterminate revenues. The direct taxes or contributionaries directas were divided into 2 parts. First, the personal taxes, and second, the income tax.
The personal taxes or las contribuciones directas. The following comprise the personal taxes collected by the Spanish government in the Philippine Islands. Number 1 is tribute from natives. In one of the laws set forth in Las Leyes de las Indias, the laws of the Indies, which has been several times recompiled at and repromulgated and dating originally from 1523, nearly 50 years before the conquest of Manila, reads, "Since it is a just and reasonable thing that the Indians who may be pacified and reduced to be obedience and vassalage to us should render tribute in recognition of our sovereignty, and should give us service as our subjects and vassals owe, and as moreover they have established among themselves the custom of paying tribute to the chiefs, we command that they be persuaded to aid us with tribute in such moderate amount of the fruits of the earth as may from time to time to be required by law." The collection of this tribute was commenced in the Philippines immediately after their conquest by Legazpi and was continued until 1884 during the term of Governor Joaquin Jobilar, a period of over 300 years with but little change in form or in the methods of administration and with no change in principle. The tribute was personal tax of the nature of a uniform poll tax and was only direct tax universally enforced. It was levied on natives including mestizos, Spaniards resident and the islands were exempt from paying this tribute. The rate known as 1 tribute was originally 8 silver reales fortes for each family, but this was eventually raised to 10 reales fortes or their equivalent and subsequently to 12 reales fortes or their equivalent. The usual practice in the mode of payment is that the tribute might be paid in money or in kind, or partly in one, partly in the other. When paid in kind, those products which were easily disposed of were to be prepared. The products were accepted at values determined in advance according to a table of official values. Those which might be tendered by raid
match from time to time from province to province or from district to district. In most cases, the tribute had to be rendered in the staple product of the province. The most common staple was rice or palay, but later tobacco was required from certain provinces.
The unit of assessment for the taxation and revenue raising scheme was the family. For this purpose, the family ordinarily include a married man over 20 years of age and his wife and minor children. Every unmarried male over 20 and every unmarried female over 25 living with the parents paid one-half a tribute. The duty to contribute the tribute ceased when the taxpayer reached 60 years of age. Otherwise stated, this tribute was a uniform poll tax at the rate of half a tribute levied upon every person, male or female, over 16 years of age and under 60. Aside from the Spanish residents, certain individuals were exempt from payment of the tribute. These persons were the following:
The alcaldes, gobernadors, and the cabezas de barangay who collected these tributes or taxes, as were also their wives and firstborn sons. Or, if they had no sons, the persons adopted, such as this exemption lasted 3 years or for the duration of the term of office. Soldados and milicianos, soldiers and militiamen, both active and retired or invalided, together with their wives and those sons who resided under the parental roof. Also their widows, and further, the member of the provincial reserves, members of the various branches of the Guardia Civil or Civil Guard, exclusive of the Municipal Guard, including members of the Resguardo Volante, Revenue Inspector and Guardias Volantes, the Custom House Guards, Carabineros de Hacienda, and the Marine Guards, Resguardos Maritimos with their wives and sons, inspectors of tobacco and storekeepers, both male and female, under the administration of the tobacco monopoly, with their wives or husbands and sons. Fifth, government employees receiving a fixed salary. Los indigentes y los discapacitados, paupers and cripples receiving public benevolence. Miscellaneous persons, some exempt in recognition of distinguished services to the government or to agriculture or industry, and others for buena causa, just cause.
In case the payment of the tribute should become excessively burdensome on account of suffering among the people from plague, failure of crops, or severe typhoons, such payment might be wholly or partially suspended or remitted. Las leyes de Indias, or the laws of the Indies, require that the natives or the Indians should pay the tribute in their respective pueblos and that they must not be required to deliver it elsewhere. On the basis of this provision, the native chefs or the cabezas de barangay were made actual collectors of the tribute for the 40 or 50 families under their charge, and the other local officials, namely the alcaldes, for the province, the mayors, los corregidors, or the petty governors, los gobernadorcillos, commonly known as captains, for the municipality, were held responsible for collection of the tributes, which were then remitted through their hands to their treasury in Manila. It was at one time prescribed that no cabeceria should contain less than 45 nor more than 50 contributors, but this provision was often difficult to comply with and fell into abeyance. Every second year, a padron de tasas or tax list was made up for each cabecera and served as a basis of assessment for 2 years. This list was practically a census of the tribute-paying natives. The padron or the list gave the names, ages, and occupations of the heads of families subject to the tribute. This padron had to be reviewed as well by the Cura Parroco or parish priest, who was supposed to compare this list with the parish records and vouch for its correctness. The cabezas de barangay were charged with all the tributes due and demandable from those contributors whose names were entered in the Padron de Tasas. If the whole amount were not turned in at the end of 3 months, they were liable to imprisonment and their goods were subject to confiscation. These drastic measures of imprisonment and confiscation were often enforced with the utmost severity. Besides the tribute, the native Indians paid in the same manner 3 other taxes amounting in all to 5 silver reals, 1 real for the Taita Desmos, 1 real for the community fund, Cara di Comunidad, and 3 reals for the church under the name Sanctorum.
The tithe or dismo was supposed to be paid by all residents of the islands, even by those who, for reasons of state or religion, or by favor were exempt from the tribute. Despite the name, the dismo was not always exactly 10%. The actual amount differed in different places and times, nor was it extended to all products of agriculture and husbandry, which led to market distortions as farmers shifted to whatever was not taxed by the Spanish officials. The most efficacious measure against fraud was excommunication, which would remain in place until one's debt was paid, but effective only against those natives who underwent conversions to Roman Catholicism. As preserved by some observers, the dismo or tithe never attained the lofty importance as a significant source of revenue to the Spanish government in the islands. As originally conceived, the tithe was originally 1/10 of the fruits of the soil or of any profits or income and pertained to the Spanish crown. But those who paid the tribute were declared exempt so far as their states were concerned, and for them the tithe was commuted and added to the tribute at the uniform rate of 1 real. From 1635, the term of Governor Juan Cirizo de Salamaca and followed thereafter by Governor Sebastian Hurtado de Corcuera to the middle of the 19th century, there was a further addition to the tribute and the rate of 1/2 real for each contributor. The said addition of 1/2 real was supposedly to defray the expeditions to and conquest of Hulu and of adjacent Muslim-occupied islands. This additional tribute was known as the Donativo de Zamboanga. The tribute demanded from the mestizos de Sangle or the Chinese mestizos, the sons by native women or the Sanglias or Chinese traders in the islands, was double in amount that levied on the natives. Thus, the mestizos de Sangle were accordingly charged and compelled to pay 2 reals for the tithe, 1 real for the community fund, and 3 reals for the Sanctorum. Spanish mestizos, however, were exempt from the tribute. These exemptions included the sons of Spaniards by native women and of natives by Spanish women.
In 1781, during the administration of Governor Jose Vasco, the province of Bulacan voted for a special tax, the purpose which was to equip 2 boats of the variety known as ventas, for the protection of the coast of the archipelago from the attacks, incursions, and raids of the Moras. This tax, called the ventas, amounted at first to 1/2 real for each person who paid tribute, was afterward raised to 1 ganta of palay. The province of Pampanga later joined Bulacan in the payment of ventas. This tribute was abolished in 1829 during the term of Governor Mariano Ricafort Palakin, and its place was taken by a tax on costing trade. The venta tax was revived again later
but this tax was finally suppressed in 1851 during the tenure of Governor Antonio D. Orbistundo.
Taxation in the Philippines, its historical development. Leader, Angela Lozada. Members, Monica Shane Gallo, Zaira Bandejas, Letley Valenzuela, Ivil Villagracia, Lester Siscar, and Anabea Amos.